exactly what this bio is, exactly. Winitha Bonney is Australia's first and foremost thought leader in the advancement of people of colour and in building anti-fragile cultures of allyship. She has over 21 years of experience in executive roles and has founded several businesses and is a person with multiple lived experiences. I'm not going to read the whole bio because I think it's like those brilliant intros before movies that go, well, I've just read it all. You've said it all. Thankfully, we get to speak to her this morning. Thank you, Winitha Bonney, for joining us on Really Good Radio this morning.
No worries. Glad to participate.
Thank you so much, and I know I really do thank you because I know you're in a pretty busy schedule of your life, and sleep is the ultimate. And you could have added an extra half an hour of your own time, but thanks for joining us. And how are you at the moment, and what are you up to at the moment? I know you're writing a book, but I'll let you kick things off.
Yeah. At this time in the morning, you are certainly not gonna get the up version of myself. And you're probably going to get the husky morning.
Husky's good. We play a lot of smoky blues music, so husky's all right in the morning. That's all right.
Yeah. So what a lot of people don't know is that I actually have a dance background.
There we go.
Yeah, so I have a dance background. I did professional dance. Not ballet. I actually did traditional African. I mean, within African dance, there is 200 substyles. So I did a lot of traditional African dance, mixed it with contemporary. I also did a lot of what we call commercial hip hop and jazz as well. So, but I have had multiple careers, and I've run at least 3 careers at the same time at once. So I always had a corporate career. I did dance. I used to say, I'm a corporate worker by day, and you give people mixed ideas, right?
You got to tell them what involves. yeah.
I don't dance on a pole.
There's no poles involved.
not that there's anything wrong with that, but I am definitely not skilled.
yeah.
That area.
That is a skill, by the way.
Yeah.
That is a skill.
Yeah, and then I have a really solid, business background. So I've had several businesses. So when all the girls my age, at 16 years of age, were interested in the Hanson brothers, I was really interested in profit and loss statements and commercial law and all that kind of geeky stuff, really.
Wow, we talk about this a little bit this week about opening your own doors and being told as a female you shouldn't be interested in certain things. I don't know if many women would have been encouraged, or actually just been genuinely interested in P&Ls.
Yeah.
Did you have it? Was it around you? Have you got business people or entrepreneurial brains around you growing up, or was that kind of a real left field decision of yours?
Real left field. I mean, back then, I don't know how young I look to everyone on the screen, but I'm probably older than what most people think. So back when I started a business, which, when I was 15, 16, we didn't call it entrepreneurship or startup. We called it a small business. And it wasn't as, sexy as it is now.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the most glamorous choice. There was this narrative around small business owners being poor and working really, really hard.
Yeah.
It was actually, the wonderful Oprah Winfrey, that had a series called Follow Your Passion. And it was a series about all these women that turned their passion into their business. And when I saw that, I was like, that's what I want to do. And I almost failed at every single subject in school, except for obviously art and anything artistic and music. But when it came to business, it was like a language that I understood straight away. And I think that's because that was my calling inherently. So I do a lot of work now with people of color, but I do bring a lot of my leadership experience and my business experience into that. So for example, at the moment, I'm working with a group of women who are originally from Papua New Guinea and extremely, extremely entrepreneurial, but just need some of those business skills so that they're not living dollar to dollar. They're actually got cash in the bank and some savings stocked up.
That's, cool. Good space to work in. So much work to do. Did you always have a desire to look after the, my words lost me, minority groups kind of vibe? Being a person of colour, were you always interested in helping your community with those early moments of being 15, 16? Or was it slightly greedy at the start? You just want to make cash and you're thinking, then you're thinking, this ain't, what changes? What changes?
So yeah, definitely made cash. When I was in year 12, my careers, the careers counselor was like, what are you going to do after school? And I was like, be a bum on the beach. And they were like, no, what you going to do? I was like, oh, okay, fine. I'm going to start my own business. And they're like, okay, go to RMIT. And I was like, okay. And they were like, what kind of business? I'm like, I don't know. I want it to be international. And they're like, study international business. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, right.
So off I went to university. But I think I started a non-for-profit youth dance company, and I very quickly saw how Eurocentric it was. I very quickly saw how, that I was always, when we would take group photos, like as a dance industry community, I was always like that brown dot that, like, where's Winitha? Well, she's over there. And I went to America, and I did training there in LA and lived there for a little bit. And I remember this one moment where I found myself in a room. I'm not an African background, I'm South Asian, but in a room with all African Americans. And for the first time, I was like, oh my God, I see my color.
Yeah, right.
Because I grew up in a white community. I grew up where I was the only person of color in kindergarten, primary school, secondary school. Back in university, there wasn't a lot of international students. So when I was in LA, I was like, oh my goodness. And I was living in North Hollywood. And when I would, take the bus to go to the dance studio, there would be a lot of Latinas, on the bus. And I just for the first time, just really, really felt at home. And I think that's where my social justice muscle, really built up. And I made the decision to hire a choreographer who's originally from Zimbabwe to be the artistic director of my company. And he's done a lot of work with, him and his wife have done a lot of work with Indigenous communities. So we got involved in some groups and worked with some choreographers, and, and through that had a lot of respect for First Nation culture and the story behind dance, that it wasn't just what the media portrayed. And then through Gilbert was exposed to a lot of, traditional African dance. And again, with dance, with, Black, Brown, First Nations communities, there is storytelling behind it. And I started getting that social muscle started getting stronger around, why are we just teaching ballet and jazz in dance school? And I also started seeing how Gilbert would be discriminated in the dance community. So at one point I found myself as the CEO of the Australian Dance Council, which is responsible for the dance industry. And I felt discrimination towards myself, definitely discrimination towards him when I would take him to industry events.
Right.
And I was like, screw, I know this is PG rated, so
that's all right.
Fair. And I was like, F this.
Yeah.
F this. So I quit that job, and started this journey around, because through that I started doing a lot of research. And at that time, Misty Copeland, who's an African-American ballet dancer, started rising up. And I started reading a lot of articles around where are all the Black dancers. And I was like, where are all the Black dancers?
Yeah.
And just started doing that work. But I think it really is steeped in just my DNA, I think, around fighting for people that aren't heard and seen. And I think my calling is using my husky voice, as loud as it can be sometimes, to advocate for people who aren't able to advocate for themselves because of trauma and discrimination.
Yeah. I've got a few different trains of thoughts here. One of them is just, the different. I just wonder again always the differences between why someone speaks and why someone doesn't speak. And it's just, I'm going to think about that more probably during today and probably for the rest of my life. But it's really interesting to think about. These guests that I've got on. The reason why you do it is to speak for the people that are silenced, and it brings to the question why they're getting silenced. But let's go into so you really have gone to the snake's head, I call it, like with what you do now. You're going into corporate settings. You realize that, and you've touched on it a little bit, that being at the top doesn't always mean that you're safe. You can be quite attacked, but you also are responsible for a lot of the decision making and the influence of where organisations go. You're now going directly to those sources in what you do now. Is that correct? Is that what Winitha is about? Tell us a little bit about how you approach that. You're dealing with a delicate space, a lot of pride and privilege and racism and discrimination embedded in culture, and assuming that you're spending a lot of time in Australia doing this. Tell us some of the examples that I guess connect you to organisations, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, so I do have some clients that are, based overseas. I generally find them to be easy to work with. So Australians will always say, "Oh, discrimination doesn't happen here in Australia. Racism only happens in America." And I was like, I don't have to apologize for being a person of color. I don't have to take the word anti-racism out of my proposals. When I put a proposal forward to an American company, they get it. So I think that's an indication that there is a severe problem here. And so I call myself a mediator. So I work a lot with people of color directly in community, giving them the tools to navigate and to thrive in white systems and structures. And then I work with corporations and I do a lot of education and training around what the experience is for, Black, Brown, First Nations, people of color, and what they need to do. And I think for me, the competitive edge that I have is because I'm constantly in both zones, and I'm on top of the conversation that's happening in both spaces. And essentially what I'm doing is trying to bring the both spaces together to a point where discrimination doesn't, exist. That said, dealing with organizations here in Australia is quite difficult. So I found this year the conversation has been easier. So I was one of the first to publicly start using the words women and people of color. And there was a lot of pushback from corporates. People would say, we prefer multiculturalism, we prefer cultural diversity because it's more, inclusive. We're worried about segregation. And in my head, I was like, I'm sorry, you don't get to use that word. Don't get to use that word. And the irony of them using that language and having those conversations with a person of color that is right in front of them, which is part of the problem because they don't see color. And so therefore that is the foundation of all the experiences and problems they're having in their organization. So the juggle for me is having to make a lot of compromises. I call it an emotional bandwidth, and not everyone has that. Obviously, my experiences aren't the same as those that come from an African background or those that are First Nations. So I feel like for me to have those conversations, I have, because I have different experiences, I'm able to bring those voices with me into that space. And to be very direct about it and to advocate for that. And I call them idiots. So there are definitely a lot of idiots out there, and it can definitely be unmotivating. And so for me, the balance and the importance is always coming back to community, being with sisters from Papua New Guinea and just being in that space just fills my cup. And reminds me of, why I'm doing what I'm doing. But it is difficult work. Not everyone has emotional bandwidth for it. You will be constantly discriminated, directly to your face, just to try to get your foot in the door to do some deep and meaningful work. But I think it's the journey that you take them on, and it's about positioning it as an invitation, as opposed to blaming and shaming.
How quickly does it turn? How quickly do you notice that when you're going in there as and you haven't mentioned gender in your bio and in any of your work, how quickly though do you experience that it is about gender in a lot of those corporate settings? mainly because a lot of white men are at the top. Do you try and avoid? Do you try and avoid talking about being a female, or do you kind of slide that one in and go? And while we're here, I can see there's a problem here with a lot of men. It's relationships with women in this workplace. Do you bring that in? Do you intertwine it, or do you avoid it to go, look, let's just concentrate on colour right now? Because you're talking about allyship. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story. So when I was in kindergarten, I cornered two guys, two young boys back then, James and Henry, in the book section at kindergarten. Rolled up my sleeves and showed them my muscles, and I said, I'm stronger than you. So when I see an executive team that are full of white pale male stale men, that actually makes me excited. And I'm like, where are my boxing gloves?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, particularly for me, Asian skin, you tend to look a lot younger as well. So you know. And so, there are a lot of assumptions, but I think for me, the reminder for myself is just to continue to breathe, breathe through those situations. But I see them as an opportunity for me to do some really deep and meaningful work. In terms of gender, you do experience the same sort of pushback of, we just want to hire on experience and qualifications as opposed to ticking the box and stuff like that. So, and I think, that in itself is an entirely different conversation. But again, it's how you have that conversation. And I think my strength is that I am pretty, I do have a very strong masculine side of me.
Sure.
So I can have really direct conversations with people and get on their level very quickly.
Do you mean? I think I know what you mean. Do you mean like the style of conversation doesn't get picked apart, or your temperament and your strength in voice, all those things that males seem to think that they own and are them? Is that what you mean? Like even those little behaviours and things that are innate with it? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't water down. If pre-COVID, if I would meet with people in person, I don't water down how I present myself. But when I would meet with them in person, I make sure, it's all these little strategic moves. I make sure that I sit at the head of the table. I make sure I give them a firm handshake. I open up my body language and make sure that it's quite masculine. And I don't beat around the bush. I get stuck into the conversation and am very direct very quickly. And for me, it's about owning that space, because I have been in that space, very often. And I, if they make comments around, gender, then I call it out in a respectful way, but say this is, and have that direct conversation as well. So, I used to work with one consulting company, and I was doing a lot of innovation work. And I said, we sat down as a group, and I said, there's a boys club happening here, and I'm not having any, I'm not having any part. So what are we going to do about it? And
I love it. I wish I was a fly on the wall in most of your life in the last 5 years. I think it'd probably, I'm the first to put my hand up. I'm a privileged male. Just because I'm in some minority groups, I'm certainly in a lot of privilege, and I learn a lot by listening and stopping and checking myself. It's the invisible stuff, like the invisible stuff men feel that they can get away with, and they kind of, we discreetly make decisions that maybe not ruffle the feathers right now, but we might walk away and go, oh, far out. Glad that was over. Let's go back to what we're doing. Or it could be in that kind of vein where. And we had a men's mental health week last week, which was really great. In it's a nice tie into, hopefully there's people out there and men understanding where we can, because we are in a place of influence and tend to be, that's just the landscape right now, where we're in places of position of power that we need to make better decisions that include all this information. So I appreciate it. And Andrew Clark, a First Nations brother, is on online chat. He said in some or most First Nations culture, women are the frontline warriors, which is amazing. These stories need to really be heard. And you got heaps of people saying, yeah, go girl. Go girl. Thanks, Deb. Hey, allyship. Let's talk about allyship. That's something that includes everyone. What do you talk about? What do you think about when you describe a good ally and describe a not so good ally? What's the difference between the both?
Yeah. So good allyship is active, bad allyship is passive. And I always say that allyship is not a choice, it's an obligation and it's an expectation. So I think that's what people get really confused about. They think that, allyship is something, and I've run a lot of masterclasses, this year because there is so much fear around being an ally and doing the work. And I was calling people out around, you've done enough reading, you've done enough studying.
Yes.
Listen to enough podcasts. You now need to go out there and do the work. So the framework that I use is that the behavioral change is around the assumption or the belief, and which is why unconscious bias training doesn't work, is that if we change our thoughts, it would change to a shift. It would lead to a shift in feelings, which would then lead to a shift in behavior. But it's actually the opposite way around. So neuroscience and research shows that if we first change our behavior, it would shift our feelings, which would then shift our thoughts. In terms of allyship is someone who is unapologetic about being an ally, and a great ally is someone that engages in behaviors first, as opposed to getting a shift in their awareness. So yes, awareness is really important, but you're not going to know that unless you're a psychic, right? Unless you're a psychic, you're not going to, or you take some psychedelic drug and you dive deep into your ancestral past. You're not going to know. There's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame, particularly for white people around, having to pay for the mistakes of their, ancestors. And it's not about that. It's about the opportunity to create change and to make amends for ancestral trauma. That is the opportunity to change the world that you currently live in and to provide a safe space for future generations as well. So it's a reframe, but you won't know that until you actually engage in it. And look, even for me, being an expert, like I learned a couple of months ago that there is a cartoon frog called Pepe or whatever the F his name is, who is linked to white supremacy movement. And I was like, what the F? He's so cute.
Is that? I didn't know about this.
Yeah, so there is a frog that
a current cartoon?
His name is Pepe, I don't know, P-E-P. I can't even pronounce his bloody name. But he's linked to white supremacy movement, and he is he's one of those, emojis or things that kind of pop up in social media spaces. And I was like, why do people do this? They take an innocent frog. So, even for me, like I'm constantly learning and growing, but importantly, it's about showing up. If you truly love someone and you truly care for them, you will have their back and you will show up.
Even if you don't know anything about why they are fighting for themselves, that's the key. Hey, you don't have to know or understand the framework or where they're from. You're just standing by them and being there with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Regardless, yeah.
With Gilbert, my artistic director, who's from Zimbabwe, we had a lot of conversations about what he's experienced, because he's had this incredible career where he's toured around the world. And for me, it's sitting at their feet and learning from them, hearing their voices. But then at the end of the day, you've got to do something about it. So with Gilbert, I was putting him forward for a lot of opportunities to make sure that he's valued, and it's about getting stuck into that. And yes, you're going to make mistakes because you are not freaking perfect. You are imperfect human living in an imperfect world. You are not perfect. So you're going to make mistakes, So what the hell? Just jump into it. And, people are scared about getting it wrong, but, the opportunity is for you to build antifragility, which is, resilience is pushing against change so that, situations don't impact you. Antifragility invites them in. And this is why a lot of, Black, Brown, First Nations people are have a very strong sense of spirit and self, because they've had to constantly lean into that tension, lean into that challenge. But as a result of that, they have developed this sense of antifragility, which is this ability, this incredible strength, this inner strength. And that has then had a flow-on effect to other parts of their life as well, and to future generations. And what allies don't know is that that is a bigger opportunity. And, you know, as you engage in actions first, actions precedes clarity. You know, motivation does not happen before you take action. Motivation happens after you take action.
Writing that down. Action before clarity, not the other way around.
Not the other way around. So It's only when you engage in the action that you will get clarity around, okay, that wasn't the right thing to do. That wasn't the right thing to say. Okay, now I understand. That is not what you're going to learn from a podcast or a textbook. That is what we call lived experience. So you as an ally also have lived experience. It just looks different. And so you need to take certain behaviors, you need to take action. That will lead to a shift in feeling. You'll be like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Oh, that wasn't the greatest thing in the world. And that will then impact your thoughts and shift your thoughts. It will create new neural pathways in your brain.
You speak with clarity. I love it. I love it. I don't have to decipher things. I'm like, I've been told. Excellent. I'm going to write that down and follow that tick. This is great. Hey, I'm thinking about First Nations women, brown women around the world that may listen to this in the future, because it is now going to be a podcast available later. But even right now, I know some people out here, there's some First Nations listeners on here that might be feeling inspired or and also challenged about, they might want what you're doing, or want that's what they're fighting for, to be unapologetic. Where do they, what steps or things do they draw into to build up that strength within them from your view?
Yeah. So the first step in leadership is around healing. So a lot of the research that I've done shows that for Black, brown, First Nations people, the first step is actually in healing, and it is about the reclaiming of your inner power. So a lot of us jump to what I call part 2, which is rewriting our outer world. And that's what I talk about in this book that I wrote, right? So, which is around how do we navigate white spaces? How do we have difficult conversations? How do we deal with discrimination and things like that? That's great, but that's your outer world and that's your outer experience. Like you mentioned before, when you step into, sorry, that was my alarm to actually get up.
That's a serious alarm. Chainsaw.
Yeah, I need music to like get me up. So the first step is actually in healing, and a lot of us have cultural practices and rituals around tapping into the strength of our ancestors. And so what I invite people to do is to dive deep into that, but to also look at the stories of people that actually walked the path before us, because yes, it was incredibly difficult. Yes, some of those stories might be really traumatic, but therein actually lies the blueprint for you. The blueprint has been created, the path has been created, and you are your ancestors' hope. You are their dream, and you are their hope. You are everything that they believed and everything that they fought for. And the blueprint is there. And so it's about knowing, part of our healing is about knowing that when we walk into spaces, we're walking with our ancestors into those spaces. And it's about, and it's about doing the inner healing work of some of those narratives that no longer serve us, and creating a narrative that does serve us as well. So yes, we are going to encounter, discrimination. Yes, it isn't a pleasant thing to encounter. And so that healing process is something that needs to constantly take place. But part of that healing journey is the work around identity. And within that work, it's about, understanding the ancestors that came before you, and to even tap into some of those cultural practices that have been practiced for years and years and years, and being authentic, not diluting those practices as well, and preserving that. As part of your toolkit, I encourage everyone to do work around self-preservation. So people talk about self-care and self-love and self, but the first thing that you need to be doing is in spaces where you are being attacked and discriminated, or you are feeling like your power has been taken away from you, is actually around self-preservation. Audre Lorde, who is a famous Black queer activist, said that self-preservation is activism. Because in that moment, people want to depower you. People want to attack you constantly so that they wear you down. And so when you stand in your personal power and you have a strong sense of identity and you claim that unapologetically and you live that inside and outside of your house and your safe spaces, you start to wear them down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your book.
Yeah, so I wrote the book. It was a spiritual calling. So I wrote 90,000 words in 2.5 weeks. And that's the only reason why I can say that happened. That happened, not because I'm a prolific writer. My writing's actually really bad. But the book is called Colorful from the Inside Out: How Women of Color Can Become Powerful Leaders That Transform the World. And for me, it was, a spiritual calling, but it was inherently about providing a tool that was going to be really accessible, so that their voices were going to be heard and that they would get the support that they need to reclaim their inner world and rewrite their outer world and to succeed. Because there are incredible women of color that have created success. Those stories just are not publicly known for obvious reasons.
What are the obvious reasons? Give us one.
Suppression.
Yeah.
White male, privilege. So that story, that narrative is elevated and is the majority. But there are all these stories, which is why tapping into your ancestral heritage and culture is really important, because those stories are there. You just need to dive into the research and to find out the stories. And if you are in a position where your grandparents or great-grandparents are alive, is to spend time with them. And as much time, because they are holding a lot of that in their head. They just aren't talking about it for particular reasons. So you need to spend time 100%. With the older people.
Winitha, is that right? Winitha, I got it. I'm glad I got it right. When just before you got on, I was like, maybe it's not even what I've just made up. Maybe it's something else. But Winitha, thank you. I'm super impressed by your voice and the way you speak. It's really it's one thing to have these thoughts and experiences, but to be able to get them out to a level where people are really interested in what you're saying. It's part of it. You don't want people to listen to you and go, boring. Or, I'm really encouraged by you. And I've got Carissa is just another First Nations person is listening right now. Your work is amazing. There's some great chat, little comments, like little emojis and stuff, which I can't say because they're lips. They're lips with other little hearts next to them, and people doing brown fists and
yes.
I really, so get over to Winitha, which is WINITHA.com. Her book is up there, ready for grabs. There's also speaking contacts there if you want to get Winitha to come in and speak to your organisation. The program she's involved in, there's an online store. There's also resources. Great website there, and that's winitha.com. Global, love it. Went for the global name. Didn't do the .au, went global.
Yeah.
Tough decisions, these website addresses. And say hello to Julie when you see her next. I just cannot get time to hang out with her. I used to spend time with her at a cafe, but it's good to know that you're surrounded by other brilliant women who are in your corner. Thanks heaps. And
Thanks, bro. Thank you.